The evening of January 13th, 2012 moments, it would become an open wound, one that continues to bleed in the collective memory. The Costa Concordia, a titan of the sea, was about to author one of the most tragic chapters in modern maritime history. She was no ordinary vessel. At her launch, the Concordia was hailed as a monument to Italian pride. A floating city, nearly 300 meters long and over 30 meters wide, built to carry more than 4,000 souls. With her glittering decks, fine restaurants, theaters, and pools, she was the embodiment of accessible luxury. A dream for those seeking to escape the mundane, to be cradled by the sea. She was a showcase of modernity, flying the Italian flag in ports across the globe. For years, she had sailed without incident, a symbol of power and security. Every voyage was a promise of relaxation, of entertainment, of carefree days. Entire families embarked, filled with the excitement of a life far from daily worries. For many, the Concordia was not merely a mode of transport, but the start of an adventure, the perfect frame for unforgettable memories. But behind the ship's grandeur, a shadow was gathering. No one could have imagined that a single human error, one fateful choice, would transform this icon of beauty into a mangled wreck, humbled before the Italian coast. That evening, her decks were alive. Families with children, couples on their honeymoon, tourists from every corner of the world. They were laughing, dining, raising a toast. Many were in the theater, others strolled the promenade. Some simply savored the fresh sea air. It was a night of celebration, of serenity. But beneath this placid surface, destiny was accelerating, poised to capsize everything. A few minutes after 9:30, the Concordia approached the island of Giglio. Her captain decided to deviate from his course, to steer closer for a spectacular salute, a maritime gesture known as a sail-by. It was a tradition, an act of vanity, a way to display the vessel's magnificence. But this needless, reckless maneuver would have irreversible consequences. A sudden, violent impact tore through the calm. The ship had struck the Skoll rocks, hidden just beneath the water's surface. The sound of shables. Passengers looked around, bewildered, as their dream cruise became, in an instant, a waking nightmare. A monument to Italian pride, the Concordia had begun its slow, inexorable descent into the abyss of history. In the first moments, comprehension failed to dawn. Aboard the floating city, passengers grasped for rational explanations. Some assumed a technical failure, others a sudden, sharp maneuver. Accustomed to the myth of the unsinkable ship, they clung to the hope that this was merely a fleeting inconvenience. But deep within the vessel, near the engine rooms, a different reality took hold. There, the sound was unmistakable. A violent roar of surging water that erased all doubt. The ship shuddered, its forward momentum dying abruptly. The lights flickered, then plunged the vessel into seconds of profound darkness. A silence followed, only to be shattered by the crash of plates, the eruption of screams, and the cries of frightened children. Corridors, now lit by the cold glow of emergency lighting, felt suddenly narrow, suffocating. The Costa Concordia, a kingdom of celebration and ease just minutes before, was now enveloped by a primal fear. On the command bridge, the truth was absolute. The hull was torn open. Water was breaching the compartments with terrifying speed. Yet below decks, a fiction was being broadcast. An announcement assured passengers of a simple electrical blackout. "We kindly ask you to return to your cabins," a voice declared. Everything is under control. We are resolving the issue. But that forced calm, that desperate attempt to mask the scale of the catastrophe, could not last. Soon, the world began to tilt. At first, it was a barely perceptible sway, a gentle rocking, then more and more, until people were forced to brace themselves against the walls to keep from falling. Glasses tumbled from tables, chairs slid across floors that were no longer level. It was impossible not to understand. Something enormous was happening. Passengers now ran through the corridors, shouting for information, searching for lifeboats. As panic consumed the ship, the inhabitants of the island of Giglio watched from the shore in disbelief. From their harbor, they could see the Leviathan listing in the dark, its grand profile traced by just a few dying lights. For those on land, the sight was surreal. For those on board, it was the beginning of a desperate fight for survival. Minute by agonizing minute, the situation worsened. The Concordia continued its slow, relentless incline. Hallways ceased to be hallways. They became treacherous, slippery ramps, pulling down objects, luggage, and people alike. The slanted floors warped all sense of direction, making the simplest act, to walk, to stand, to find a way out, a monumental struggle. Finally, after an eternity of hesitation, the order came. Abandon ship. But the minutes that had been lost were a currency that could never be recovered. In that squandered time, a floating palace was sealed as a tomb, a testament to how swiftly the grandest designs of man can be undone by a single, fatal moment of indecision. Lowering the lifeboats had become an impossible task. The vessel was already listing too far to one side. Many on the starboard side, now perilously close to the water, were unusable. From the high port side, they had to be lowered with agonizing effort amidst a storm of screams, shoves, and utter confusion. Passengers swarmed the decks. Many were without jackets, others, still in evening attire, were wholly unsuited for the biting cold of the night. Some clung to loved ones, to children, resolved not to be separated. In that moment, there was no distinction between rich and poor. There was only the primal will to survive. Shouts mingled with prayers and weeping. A few tried to maintain calm, helping the weakest among them. Others surrendered to raw panic. The evacuation was a study in chaos. Lifeboats jammed in their davits. Others were launched improperly. Many, seeing no other way, simply threw themselves into the sea, braving the frigid water in a desperate gamble to reach the coast. And as chaos reigned on the ship, from the small port of Giglio Island, the first glimmers of rescue appeared. Local fishermen, in their small boats, launched into the darkness. They raced toward the wounded giant to save whomever they could reach. These were ordinary men, without formal training, but armed with a courage that, on that night, was worth more than any protocol. The scene was surreal. A colossus of the sea, crippled on its side, illuminated by the stuttering flashes of emergency lights. Around it, dozens of small vessels bobbed in the waves, plucking men, women, and children from the dark water. In those dramatic hours, the fates of thousands of people hung in a fragile balance, suspended between terror and hope. On the mainland, the news began to spread. Television networks, newspapers, social media, all began to speak of a cruise ship in distress off the coast of Tuscany. At 4 would soon be resolved. But the images arriving from Giglio told a different story. They showed a white Leviathan turned on its flank, with hundreds of souls desperately seeking salvation. What was meant to be a night of celebration was becoming a tragedy. under the eyes of Italy and the entire world. As the night wore on, the Costa Concordia settled deeper onto the rocks, immobilized but not yet defeated. It was transforming from a symbol of luxury and national pride into a monument to pain and human error. For those still aboard, time had lost all meaning. The minutes passed with an excruciating slowness, marked only by the metallic groans of the straining hull, by the distant, desperate calls for help, and by the fading rumble of engines shutting down, one after another. In the end, there is only the sound of a great machine dying, and the silence that follows, when our grandest designs are undone by a single, catastrophic moment. Within the vessel's steel carcass, rescuers moved through a world turned upside down. Where luminous, orderly corridors once stood, there were now warped passages. Walls had become floors, floors had become ceilings. The laws of gravity itself had been rewritten. Every foot gained was a struggle, a climb, a crawl over the wreckage of luxury furnishings that only hours before had been symbols of opulence. They searched for the living, their knocks echoing against cabin doors, listening for the faintest sound in the suffocating silence, praying for a voice to answer. Outside on the island of Giglio, the emergency was total. A small community, accustomed to the deep quiet of the winter months, was now at the epicenter of a global drama. Its narrow streets swelled with the shipwrecked, with the flashing lights of ambulances, with volunteers. The islanders offered everything they had: blankets, food, the very beds from their homes. Every open door became a sanctuary, every act of solidarity a fragile barrier against the freezing grip of fear. Out on the water, the scene was surreal. The ship lay in darkness, save for a few emergency lights trembling on the waves. Helicopters circled the behemoth, their searchlights cut in stark. A white giant laid low upon the rocks, surrounded by a constellation of small Trutham. They were the razor-thin line between life and death. Every rescue was a race against the clock. The crew knew that with each degree the ship listed, the chances of finding anyone alive diminished. Still, they pushed onward, searching everywhere, without hesitation. It was a battle fought with courage and desperation, a contest of will against the inevitable. The night of the Concordia was long and cruel, but it was also a testament that in the face of catastrophe, the bravery of a few can become the hope of many. When morning finally broke, there was no doubt. The Costa Concordia would never sail again. In the stark light of day, the capsized vessel appeared as a defeated beast, a vast, white, and motionless carcass. Its silent form spoke to the enormity of the tragedy more than any words ever could. On shore, survivors huddled in makeshift shelters as the numbers began to solidify. Tens of victims, hundreds injured, too many still unaccounted for. A nation awoke to the image of its dream ship transformed into a tomb, and to a single question that burned in the collective consciousness. How was this possible? As Italy mourned, and as rescuers continued their grim search through the hollowed-out maze of the ship, the first investigations began. For when the cries for help fall silent, they are replaced by a different, more enduring search, not for survivors, but for truth. And in the wake of such a colossal failure, the answers are often as submerged and as difficult to reach as the wreckage itself. The tragedy was not born of a tempest, nor a sudden mechanical failure. It was the consequence of a human choice, a maneuver too reckless, an approach to the coast too close, and for a reason too trivial. The so-called incino, a maritime salute to the islanders, a display of the vessel's majesty. The figure of the captain, Francesco Schettino, was immediately thrust into the center of the storm. He was condemned not only for the audacious maneuver, but for a confused and fatally delayed management of the emergency that followed. After years in the courts, a final verdict arrived in 2017. 16 years in prison for manslaughter, causing a shipwreck, and abandoning his vessel. It was a sentence that, in the face of 32 extinguished lives, confirmed the chilling truth. This was not the unforgiving fate of the sea. It was the catastrophic certainty of human error. But the story of the Costa Concordia did not end that night. For months, then years, its image remained seared into the world's consciousness. A fallen giant, broken upon the rocks of Giglio. It was more than a wreck. It was an immense weight on the environment, the economy, and the collective memory. And so another challenge began. Different in nature, but no less incredible. The recovery of the ship. It would become the largest maritime salvage project ever attempted. Engineers and technicians from every corner of the globe descended upon the island. Their task was to devise a plan that seemed, until then, to belong to the realm of fiction. To right and remove a ship nearly 300 meters long, resting on a fragile seabed just yards from the homes of Giglio. It required months of design, an open-air shipyard constructed around the carcass of the vessel, thousands of specialized workers, and hundreds of divers toiling day and night. Beyond salvaging the ship, they had to protect a wounded sea. Technicians positioned vast steel platforms to stabilize the hull, while dive teams meticulously cleansed the seabed of debris, rubble, and toxic residue. Every piece recovered, every intervention made, was an act of restitution, an attempt to give back to the sea and the island a part of what they had lost. In September of 2013, the decisive moment arrived. The par-buckling operation. Using enormous metal caissons and a complex system of cables and counterweights, the Concordia was slowly, painstakingly rotated. Centimeter by centimeter, then meter by meter, it was pulled from its side until it once again stood vertical in the water. The world watched the undertaking live. For the first time since that terrible night, the giant was no longer broken on the rocks. It was scarred, devastated, but it was upright. Then, in July of 2014, came the final voyage. The Concordia was towed toward Genoa, escorted by peace, until nothing remained. Its physical story was over. The steel was gone, but the scar on the water, and in memory, remained. A timeless testament to both human hubris and our remarkable capacity to mend what we have broken. There are moments in history that must never be allowed to fade into silence. They are more than mere events. They are testaments, echoes of choices made in the crucible of time. To forget them is to erase the lessons paid for in struggle and sacrifice. For in the telling and in the remembering, we do not simply honor the past, we arm the future.